You know, 10 years ago today, our country had a hero step in, and we're going to talk with him in a moment. But he stepped in, unfortunately, after some people were killed, and after some citizens were killed, and after those in uniform that were killed. I know I speak for all of you when I say this, but I hope that you'll think through this presentation and think tonight when you're home alone, perhaps, or at the table, and remember all of those people. And moreover, the more than 200,000 names that are on that wall here in Washington, D.C., that many of us, we think about, we pray for, and we remember. Last week was National Law Enforcement Week, and for the first time ever, we were unable to hold that live vigil. And for those of you that had the honor and the privilege to attend that, like I have, it's a life-altering event. And for those of you that are watching this in law enforcement, on behalf of the nation's 3,086 sheriffs, every day I thank you for what you do. And I'm so humbled beyond words to tell you what it means to lead your organization as well, to be a part of law enforcement in some very, very small way. Now, tonight we have some amazing stories that you're going to hear. And they aren't stories, they are a discussion, which is important because at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that says Q&A, and we'll hope all of you will take a moment as you're listening and jot down some questions. Type them in the chat box, we'll look at them, we'll socialize them and prioritize and make sure that they are asked, because I think you're going to find there's some really compelling questions of how things happened, why, what were the results. And Sheriff Mike Neal, who's truly one of my heroes, I've heard this presentation and it's awe-inspiring in so many ways. And that's something that we on the sidelines forget sometimes, is that people like Sheriff Neal, before they were even a sheriff, every day they did things that were beyond words and beyond the pale. So we thank them with so many things, but we need to thank them with the support of just being there for them, especially now in this COVID environment. For those doctors and nurses, we thank you, we love you, we appreciate it. And for those in fire and EMS and law enforcement, we really, truly thank you. You know, it's a pleasure for me to introduce tonight's featured speakers. You all know him, I'm sure, by reputation. You probably read up about him. But Sheriff Neal has a really interesting past, aside from being in law enforcement, things that he's proud of, aside from those 3 daughters of his. The fact is, he spent 10 years in the fire and rescue business. He saved countless lives. It's in his DNA, ladies and gentlemen. And that's something that we all should admire, not just because he's a sheriff, as I do admire him, and he was in law enforcement, but that's something that he recognizes, is that he carries that honor around with him for the rest of his life. You know, he was also the youngest to ever receive the grade of captain in that fire agency. If that weren't enough, Sheriff Neal has also started and has led a very established national training company as it relates to safety and security. Sheriff Neal and his life has done an awful lot. He's older than the 21 that he looks like by a few years, but he's also a truly good person. And those are the things that all of us these days really appreciate. Without further ado, to talk about a very tragic, very compelling, and very important lessons learned about the West Memphis shooting in Crittenden County, which is just across the Tennessee line in Arkansas. Ladies and gentlemen, I turn it over to my friend, Sheriff Mike Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. I appreciate the kind words. Really do. It's been a long 10 years. Can't believe it's been 10 years today. In one way, it seems like it was yesterday, and then in one way, it seems like it was 100 years ago. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. It's an honor.
Yes. So do you want me to, how do you want me to?
Why don't we do it this way? Why don't you walk through the history of the event, how things came to unfold, and share a little bit about how we got to where you were in that day.
Absolutely. So May 20th, 2010 was a Thursday. It was a beautiful day, just like today was. Today was a very beautiful day here. It started out as a normal day. You know, every day in law enforcement, you get up and you go to work. You know, there's a possibility that you won't come home. That day was, one of those days. I didn't never think that morning when I got up and went to work that my day would end the way it ended. So it was very traumatic. I went to work that day. I was an Arkansas Game and Fish Wildlife Officer. I was assigned to Troop D in the Eastern Post, which covered all the eastern counties right up by the Mississippi River. West Memphis was in that post. So when the call went out that day that there was officers down and they needed assistance, we all went. And a lot of people don't know what game wardens are or what they do. Our main focus was wildlife protection and conservation, but we were also state law enforcement. So we had full arrest powers and authority as your troopers or highway patrol or any of that. So when you get a bad call like that, everybody's going to go. And I answered that call that day. And in my mind I was going over, I should have been about an hour drive. It wound up being about 40 minutes for me. I was making pretty good time, and in that time going over, you're thinking about, what's going to happen and what if in the situation, how you're going to handle these things. But on the other side of your mind, you're also thinking nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to come of this. They're already gone. It's, we've done this before. And that's where that switch, you got to be able to flip in your mind and shut that off and be prepared for that next moment. And I tell people in training all the time, in a critical situation, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to rise to your level of training or you're going to fall to your level of training. So you always got to be prepared for that day when your number's called. It's not a matter of if your number's going to get called, it's when. You have to be ready and prepared. So when I made it into town, driving a game and fish trucks, 4-wheel drive, at a high rate of speed, I guess it burnt quite a bit of gas. So I looked down and my gas light was on. I was pretty disappointed, pretty irritated that I had to stop and get gas, because I'm trying to get to a critical incident and I'm out of gas, So I pulled in to a gas station in West Memphis. Didn't know where I was at, didn't care. It was the first place I saw. I pulled in to get gas. And all the things of life were running through my head. I had to hurry up and get gas. I had to get back out. We had to do this. We had to do that. And God has a way of getting your attention. I promise you, if you've never felt this, it's pretty humbling. But I'm that guy, man. I'm blonde haired. I have squirrels running around in my head and pretty frantic. And I realized when I stopped getting gas that 200 yards from that gas station is where Bill and Brandon were killed. And I'm going to tell you, that was a pretty humbling moment, knowing that there was two guys that got up and did the exact same thing I did that morning. They kissed their family goodbye and they didn't go home. So, and it's been 10 years. It still hadn't gotten any easier. So after I finished getting gas, I was pretty focused at that point. I was pretty determined. Luckily, I turned by the service road there in West Memphis. It ran right beside I-40. And I started driving. And I started thinking, how are we going to handle this? What do we need to do? I had prepared myself. I'd put on my body armor. I had taken my rifle and had hung it around my neck, slung it, had it hanging right in front of me, had my one hand on my rifle, and I was driving with my left hand. I didn't realize 15 minutes from the time that I got into town that I would be in a gun battle for my life. As soon as I got gas, I made it about 1.5 miles down the road when the dispatchers come over the radio and they start screaming, "We need available units 798 West Service Road, Walmart. Suspects were spotted in row 12." And, you know, I talk about God a lot, and he puts you in places where he wants you. I was a game warden. You know, who would have thought I'd ever be there? But I had the tools and the equipment for the job that was needed to be done that day. So as I'm driving and that call comes in on the radio, I'm there. I'm right there at Walmart. I'm looking at it. And I passed an unmarked unit. That unmarked unit had the sheriff and his chief deputy in the car. W.A. Wren was the chief deputy and Dick Busby was the sheriff. And we met on the service road. And they turned in one end of the parking lot. I turned in the other end. And the suspects we met right in front of the Walmart doors. W.A. and Sheriff Busby went head-to-head with them first. They were shot immediately in their car. And as they were being shot, I'm coming up from the other end of the parking lot, and I see this. I see the suspects leaning out the window, and they're shooting the police car to pieces. And I knew at that point I had to do something. So in the Game and Fish Academy in 2007, when I went through it, they taught us to shoot through our windshields. In 2007, that was still unheard of. That's the kind of training that the Game and Fish gave us. We were highly trained officers. So as I was driving and approaching the suspect, I knew what I was going to do. So I was driving with my left hand. I had my rifle with my right, and I pulled it up, pointing it at the windshield as I was coming up. And I thought, I'm going to pull up and engage through the windshield. I'm not going to take time to stop, get out, or anything. And about that time, they see me, and they get back in the car, and they start to reverse. And I don't believe they were running. These guys didn't have any run in them. They were turning to attack me, is what they were doing. This was not something the Game and Fish taught us. This was a spur of the moment thing. I took my Game and Fish truck and I rammed them. State police estimated they impacted about 55 miles an hour. Now you think about the dynamics of this in a Walmart parking lot. They're not real big. That's a lot of speed, closing at a high rate of speed in a short distance. And it was a hard impact. I was not wearing a seatbelt. My airbag did not deploy. And as soon as we hit, the driver turned in his seat. Now my push bumper is touching his seat, the ram bumper, the grill on the front of this Game and Fish truck. It's touching his seat. So he's at the end of my hood. He's 7 feet from me when he turns and aims a pistol at me. And that's where I engaged the first 2 shots through the windshield. The passenger then started to engage and started shooting. He was shooting across my body through the windshield. And you can see, if you ever get to come to the museum, you can see the truck on display. You can see the bullet holes. They start at the post of the windshield, and they were coming across towards me. He was trying to find me in the truck, and I was laying over pretty much in the passenger seat, returning fire. The shrapnel was hitting me on my left side. I had a piece of glass went through my left eye. I'd cut my forehead right here when I dove into the passenger seat on my laptop desk. So I'd taken a head injury from that, but all I could think was shoot faster. And that's where I finished the rest of my magazine. I shot 30 rounds of .223 through the front windshield of that truck. And the compression and all the noise blew my left eardrum during the gunfight. I ran out of ammo. I knew I was in trouble. I was trying to reload that rifle. I was laying on top of it. I was laying on top of my service weapon. I couldn't get to my shotgun. I was kind of a sitting duck at that point. I made the decision to put it in reverse. I held the truck to the floor and reversed out. Once I come to a stop, I jumped out of the truck, ran to the back, trying to reload. I was trying to check myself for bleeding and injuries. I knew I was hurting, and one of the officers there, Nick James in West Memphis, stopped, and he picked me up and checked me out. And, you know, we re-engaged and made the scene clear at that point. So you're talking about 17-second gun battle, which doesn't sound very long, But when you have AK-47 rounds, 7.62 by 39 rounds coming across your body for 17 seconds, that's a very long time, I promise you.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Mike, some things people may find odd is that in Arkansas, the game and fish are as well trained as they are. Tell folks a little bit about the training you went through, because it wasn't a weekend camp with Boy Scouts that you had.
No. So the Game and Fish Academy is basic law enforcement academy mixed with the Game and Fish Academy. So it was 22 weeks of training. So that was an extreme long time. And in those 22 weeks, all we felt like we did was shoot, fight, and swim. Because as a game warden, you got to be able to swim. If you fall out of the boat, you got all your equipment on you. You got to be able to survive or help someone else in that situation also. So the training that the Game and Fish go through, and a lot of people don't pay attention to the game wardens or wildlife officers because they don't know anything about them. But they're highly trained. They have all the equipment. So if I tell law enforcement all the time, man, rely on your game wardens because they got all the boats, the four-wheelers, the night vision, thermal imagers. We had everything. So we were very, very well trained, and that's what allowed me to live through the day, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that from deputies across the country and law enforcement. We hear it quite often. As you're driving, in excess of 80 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, down to a scene is likely to be hot. You said, on the one hand, in the back of your mind, you got to count on your training. On the other hand, you're saying to yourself, but it won't happen to me.
Right.
Walk us through that a little bit. What do you mean it won't happen to you? Why would you say that?
So, it's complacement. That happens a lot in every job, not just law enforcement. You get complacent in your job. And you do the routine things every day. Same thing. You get up every day, you work your schedule, you go through your day, nothing happens. Nothing happens. So you start building that up in your mind that this small town USA, as sheriff right now, this is small town USA for me. This is a very rural area. Those kind of things don't happen here. This is not the kind of things that go on in our neighborhood. And, we get that mindset going. And that's what gets a lot of officers in trouble. And that's why I preach and I rely on training. If you're not training, it doesn't have to be a physical training, mentally training, thinking about it, thinking about how you're going to do it. Because if you can't win the fight in your mind, you will not win the fight on the street.
Yeah.
You've got to be mentally prepared and focused all the time. And complacency will sneak up on you, but you got to be able to throw the switch into survival mode and fight your way out.
So you're driving high speed. You're running out of gas. You get to the gas station. You said you had that moment of God touching you on the shoulder. You said two blocks or 200 yards away, is where two people lost their lives. What does that mean? What's that switch to you? What did that tell you to do? How did that change your posture?
It made it real. It was, you hear the stories on things that are going on, and I was listening to it as it unfolded in front of me on the radio and things that were going on, but it wasn't real yet until I saw it. And, I could see their vehicles. I could see the investigators. I could see everything that was going on. And that's where it really come down to a focus at that point. Wait, this is real life. This is a bad deal. We're in trouble here.
At that point, when you're there at the gas station, you're hearing sirens, I'm assuming?
No, it was eerily quiet. There was no sirens. There wasn't a whole lot of movement just at the crime scene, and they had the roads blocked, on the interstate. But it was very quiet. It was very eerie. That's part of it. I've never actually processed how quiet it was until now, but yeah, it was really weird.
I can't even imagine. Our special guest tonight, Sheriff Mike Neal from Monroe County in Arkansas, national hero who, to remind everybody, he's received a call over 100 miles away. He's a fish and game warden for the state of Arkansas. There are 2 downed officers, unknown what other casualties he's faced with. He's driving in excess of 80 miles an hour to get to the scene as fast as possible. He's nearly run out of gas. He stopped at the gas station, filled up. He's had that touch on his shoulder, my God, that says, you're in the fight. You need to get your fight game on. He's rammed the bad guys in the parking lot. He's initiated a man-to-man, hand-to-hand combat via weapons. He's emptied his magazine and his rifle, and is now faced with return fire from the perpetrators. Shots are hitting him and hitting his glass and hitting his posts in his vehicle. He's getting crossfire from the passenger side. And he realizes, 1, he's out of ammunition, 2, he's in a vulnerable position, puts it in reverse, floors it, and backs up. At that point, he's got to get out of the vehicle. Mike, I'm going to turn it to you here in a second. You get out of the vehicle, you check for wounds, you see you've got some scrapes and obviously some wounds. You're there with another officer. What's going through your mind? What is that training telling you now? What have you got to do?
Well, and you've been in a gunfight and you're hurting. So first you're going to look for blood, and that's what I was doing. And I was getting some pretty good, it turned out to be glass injury. Shrapnel from the bullets was in my left shoulder and my hip. So I knew I was bleeding. So, I'd taken a pretty good blow to the head. That was pretty traumatic thing you just went through. So your brain's going 2 million miles an hour trying to catch up. Your adrenaline is unbelievable, the adrenaline. So I'm checking myself, trying to figure out, do I have bullet holes in me? And if I do, I got to stop the bleeding, whatever. I'm kind of self-checking myself. When the other officer comes up and Nick picks me up off the ground and he's screaming at me, "You're okay?" And I said, "Man, I think I'm hit." Put me down. First of all, you're scaring me. But he sets me down. He starts checking me. He says, "You're fine." And he said, "Let's go. We got to re-engage." So as we ran by the truck, I reached in and I grabbed my rifle back out, made it back ready, got it ready for action. And that's when we all started to approach the van at that point. At this time, we didn't know if how many suspects were in the van. The initial call was it was an MS-13 gang with AK-47. So, we really didn't know what we were approaching into the second time. We didn't know if we were fixing to have another gunfight or what. But all the brave guys that were there with me, they didn't flinch. We all jumped in there and went after the fight again. I
have a question for you. How many sworn law enforcement officers are you seeing from your vantage point now? What is the situation assessed to you?
So as I was looking around, I knew there was probably 10 maybe. I wasn't sure. Now as time went on, there was 100. I mean, they were coming from everywhere. But at the initial point of going to the scene again to make it clear, I knew there wasn't over 10 of us. So, I was pretty comforted by the fact that there was 10, that I wasn't alone. So
you're looking across this parking lot and you're realizing that you've got to re-engage the officer that's there with you. Walk us through that. Okay, we've got to go back. How do we do that? What's the mechanism? What's the tactics that you put into place?
Well, so everybody was trying to maneuver around the vehicles, using those for cover as best as possible to get into place, to get a better vantage point inside the van so we could see what was going on. We were all kind of moving separately at one point, and you can watch all the videos on YouTube. And then and there at the last, we all get on a straight line and we all approach the van at the same time. Now, we did not have shields. We were just going up there with the body armor we had on and hope for the best, you know.
There's some medals over your shoulder. Notice that.
Yes.
Tell
So
me, before I change it to the next question, just tell me a little bit about this.
there's 43 awards on this wall, and every one of these awards were from the May 20th. And if you look at this one right here, this is the Medal of Valor from the president. Then I can move I don't know if I'll be able to get my computer back straight, but there's also the Medal of Valor right here. This one, that's the Arkansas Game and Fish Medal of Valor. It moves over. This one right here is, if I can figure out, I would not make a good newscaster. This one here is the Buford Pusser Award, which I thought was really cool. The NRA award is right above the Medal of Valor, but they keep going. I mean, they're all the way to the ceiling, and they kind of wrap all the way across. So
It's it looks like a lot, but there aren't enough. I'm sure I speak for the country when I say that. A couple of other. Let's get back to the incident itself now. How many bad guys are there? What do you know? How many are? I mean, you gotta be thinking. Are there more than two? Is there more than what I'm seeing? Where are they coming from behind me now? Where do I have to look?
Well, we knew that. Well, we were told that it was the MS-13 gang. So yeah, we didn't know how many were in this van. When the call went out, we were looking for a stolen white church van with the MS-13 gang in it. So, you're thinking there's 5 or 6 shooters in this van. We didn't know. All I knew is, we had to stop that threat. We had to stop the killing. And that was one of the reasons I engaged the van the way I did, by disabling it, because I knew we didn't want to get into a rolling gunfight through town. That it was already bad enough. This was at 1:19 in the afternoon on a Thursday, pretty May day, and there was no coronavirus, so you could do whatever you wanted. So people were going everywhere, and then I can remember people running in the parking lot, trying to get away from the gunfire, and here we were running to it. But as we approached the van, all the windows were out by this point from the gunfire. There was over 200 rounds fired in the parking lot. We could tell that there was only 2 people in the van, and both of them were at that point slumped over. So we were figuring that they were incapacitated at that point.
Yeah.
That's when we went up. We approached the van and we pulled the passenger out and then pulled the driver out.
There's a question that I want to share with you. I'm going to ask you, and I'll let you think about it a little bit, and I'll talk it through with you. 10 years ago, right? What's going on in Sheriff Neal's, then Game Warden Neal's life?
10 years.
Yeah.
In that dash.
Yeah. Yeah. What's life like, man? I mean, obviously, as the sheriff, you're the boss, but every day you've got to live with this.
You do. So
to carry that around.
And I'll start with on scene. There's a new normal. Nothing ever goes back to normal. It doesn't go back the way it was. It's kind of like the ripple in the water. It changes. So there's a new normal, and it on scene. I thought that was dumb. I'm going to be arrested. First of all, I'm going to get fired. I tore up my truck. I crashed it in the middle of the Walmart parking lot and shot 2 people. I'm going to jail. So that was the first thing. And then time starts progressing on, and the PTSD, which I didn't realize that I had, because I'm that guy. I don't have that. I don't, that's for weak people. That's not I don't have that problem. I grew up in the funeral business, so I was around death and dying all the time. So that You know, that doesn't bother me. But, you know, 10 years later, looking back, I realized I was a mess. I was, I was really screwed up. You know, I was struggling really bad. I felt like everybody had turned against me, and you know, and that was just PTSD is what it was.
Yeah.
It took a long time to get to the point that I am right now. And 10 years ago today, I don't want to go back there. I would never go back there. I don't want anything that's back there. My life today is so much better.
You know, Marcia and her team really push an officer wellness message so we can avoid putting more names on that wall.
Oh, absolutely.
You had two comrades that are shot across the parking lot, the sheriff and his chief deputy. In retrospect, right, thinking officer wellness, shots are fired, there's death, there's destruction. What would you advise they do differently? What would you have done differently?
Well, you know, in training, we train for scenarios. No scenario is ever going to be the same. That scenario probably never happened like that again. So training for that scenario would be really tough. Honestly, it worked the way it should have. Unfortunately, I wish we could have changed the fact that WA and Sheriff Busby were shot for sure. But if they wouldn't have pulled in that side of the parking lot, the guys would have been rolling. They'd have been going. If they wouldn't have made that head-on traffic stop, which is the most dangerous traffic stop you can ever make, you don't have that vantage point of concealment as you do from behind. So they're wide open. If they wouldn't have made that traffic stop, these guys would have been rolling. And this would have been a rolling gun battle. They were not going to go down peacefully. That was their mission.
Yeah, let's talk about that before we go to the next break. What was their mission? And and we're going to get to this in a bit. How did we find out about that mission? But what is their mission now? You're assuming it's death and destruction of anything in front of them. Assuming is that what it is?
Yeah, their mission. So they were sovereign citizens. So they were extremists. They had kind of gone off the reservation with their thinking, and in some of their videos that they had on YouTube, they talked about, you know, people would ask them questions. They were teaching classes on how to become a sovereign citizen, and they were telling people, you know, what do you do if you engage law enforcement or whatever? They'd say, pull your gun, you know, engage the law enforcement. That was their mindset, was to engage law enforcement. And the one even said, if I ever start, I won't be able to stop killing cops. So that was their mission. I mean, they knew once they started, they were going to try to kill as many as they could. Fortunately, we were able to stop that after 2 were killed and 2 more were critically injured.
I'm going to ask you one question before we go to break. We hear this often, that the hardest 2 calls for law enforcement are domestic violence disputes. Obviously, emotions are running high. There's a lot of uncertainty behind the doors, and then those traffic stops late at night. This situation, it's all there in front of you. It's I'm sure in the moment, it's bright white lights. You can see everything in front of you perfectly in retrospect.
Right.
At that moment, are you thinking, wow, it's here. I can see what I see right now is in this tunnel. It's in this straw view. Does that resonate with you?
100%. Yeah, their tunnel vision was there. I'm so glad that, you know, we weren't in Baghdad or Iraq or something like that, where threats are coming from every angle. Fortunate for us, it was directly in front of us, because I promise you, I was very honed in on what was right in front of me and not what was going on around me. You know, I was trying to eliminate the threat directly in front of me. So.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you. Quick question though for you: gas or electric?
Gas for sure.
Okay, that's fascinating.
I love gas because it just allows you to cook more evenly.
The only other thing I would say is 4 ounces. That's not a lot. I was thinking more like a beer stein.
Well, you can just tip this whole bowl back and go for it too if you want. So
that's awesome. Thank you. Let's I want to thank our 3 chefs and supporters. I just can't tell you how much it means that you guys would give your time to the Memorial Foundation. Again, Drew Wooten from Old Dominic Distillery in Memphis. Josh Steiner from Strano by Chef Josh and W&J. And then, of course, Philip Ashley Ricks, who's the chocolatier president of Philip Ashley Chocolates, all 3 in Memphis. Go online, find those folks. I have a feeling they'll be selling stuff over the internet pretty soon. Our last segment here with Sheriff Neal. I want to thank you again, Sheriff. We're in the Q&A section, so I want to remind our viewers, go to the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button there. You click on it, you can type in your question. Before we left, Sheriff, I remember you saying it was 17 minutes or maybe 19 minutes.
17 seconds.
What's that?
17 seconds. I'm glad it wasn't 17 minutes. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. I did mean second. What are all the things that happen in 17 seconds or don't happen? I mean, obviously, not a 2-minute egg, not a 1-minute egg. What other things don't happen or could happen in 17 seconds?
Right. You know, it doesn't seem like 17 seconds is very long, but the way I like to compare it to people is hold your breath for 17 seconds and see how that feels, you know, because in that gunfight, I can promise you I was holding my breath. One, the glass was the dust in the glass and the fragments flying through. At one point, I guess I did have my mouth on because it was full of glass, but those 17 seconds, there was so much chaos going on that it's hard for your mind. Well, you're not going to remember it all, you know. It's hard for your mind to process everything that's going on, and your brain kind of kicks into that fight or flight mode, and then that's where your training kicks in. Once you get into that full adrenaline and into those lobes of the brain and how it works, it's pretty interesting.
You know, we just had a question. Can we do 17 seconds of silence? I think that's a great question. I'd say we can. Yeah, let's do it. In that period of time, changed your life. Quick question from the audience here. Great job, Sheriff. It's going by fast. It says, here's a question for you. How does your experience impact you today, and how do you lead young deputies who've not been through such an experience? I put that last one first. How do you lead the younger men and women coming out into the business?
Man, I tell you, there's only one way to lead, and that's not from behind. You lead by example. You lead by doing it. Hopefully, what I do as sheriff and the way I work, the guys see it. You know, I'm not going to send them into a situation that I'm not there with them. You know, we're so small, I have to be there. So I lead by being there with them in the middle of it. And I push a lot of training on guys. We're pushing more. We got training coming up here in a couple of weeks that we're going to put the guys through. But you got to lead by example. You got to lead out front.
I hear that a lot from our members. Next question is kind of an interesting one as well. Is what would you tell new sheriffs coming that are, you know, in their just elected, just about to be elected, start their term? Aside from telling them they should be involved with their national association, what would you say to them?
Well, I'm not an old sheriff by no means. I'm on my 5th year as sheriff. Um, I've been through a lot of trials and tribulations as sheriff, and they're going to get them too. And the one thing I would encourage them is, one, you're going to have thick skin. It doesn't matter what you do, it's never going to be correct. You're not perfect. Don't try to be perfect. Just follow the guidelines and the rules and do the job the best that you can. Most perfect man in the world walked this earth, and they crucified him. Why do you think you're going to be perfect? That's kind of the way I feel about it. And don't take it personal. I did that for a long time. I took it personal. I took the hits that I was taking as a sheriff personal. That comes with a job. You're just going to have to let those hits roll off and go on to the next one. So don't take it personal, and get some thick skin, lead by example, be the leader.
Yeah. Question. When you were the suspects injured after the impact now or after the scene, you've had your investigation, what does it show? Were people injured at impact? Had they already been wounded? Had they been, what level of incapacitated are they at this point? I mean, obviously this is all in your after action. You know this now. What did you learn?
I don't believe they were seriously injured in the impact. I know the passenger was not. The driver is the one that took the actual hit. It hit his seat, but as far as injury to him, I don't believe he was injured, because he was able to turn in his seat to point the gun at me, because he had to, bend all the way around and point the gun over his shoulder. So he wasn't incapacitated by any means. He was still very, very violent at that point.
I have a question for you about going back to training for a second. You've said that you obviously have you have a company, a side business that you lead, and we're going to ask you to tell a little bit more about that before we sign off here in a few minutes. But when you go back to how law enforcement has changed in the 10 years in that interregnum, what's changed in training? What is it? Has it become? I mean, obviously, technology's been a big part of training, but what in your mind has made training more efficient or effective, and what needs to be done? What do we need to be giving our agency heads and our law enforcement officers and deputies? What are we missing?
Well, first of all, if their agency is still going to the range twice, 3 times, whatever it is a year, and shooting a paper target and saying, okay, we're good for the year, let's go, they're failing their department. They're failing their men. The administration, they need to change that attitude and that form of training. Also, the stagnant line training, we are starting to see change. Yes, there is a proficiency that the officer needs to be able to shoot, but I'm going to tell you, in a shooting situation, a lot of that goes out the window. They need the basic fundamentals. Then it needs to advance into something that is raising their heart level, that is increasing their mental cognicy, their thinking ability. They've got to be able to get out of that zone and get focused on the task at hand, running and shooting, make an approach on whatever. That's the things that are advancing in training now that weren't 10 years ago. And that's what I do is in my company is teach guys how to do that, and in administration. So there's a lot more focus on the mental aspect of the job now. 10 years ago, 3 days, hey, get back in the truck, go back to work. That's what they told me. They didn't know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me. Now, you're seeing a little bit more preparedness for agencies are working more to help guys after a shooting.
Right.
In the academy, they send you to the academy and they teach you all the tools that you need to do your job. But one thing they didn't teach us is what happens after you do it. What happens after you have to take a life? Nobody wants to do that. They don't teach you that the worst fight that you'll ever be in your life is at night when you turn off the lights, and that's with yourself. So that's where things are changing. That's the most significant change I have seen in law enforcement in the past 10 years is protecting the guy's mental health.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on something, is that everybody has weaknesses, and you know, we all have to recognize those. Talk a little bit about how many people were wounded and killed as a result of this incident.
Bill Evans and Brandon Powder were the first two officers that were murdered. And then W.A. Wren, the chief deputy, and Sheriff Dick Busby were the second two that were injured, critically injured. I was injured in it, but mine were scratches. I mean, it wasn't nothing. And then the suspects ultimately were fatalities in the situation.
Yeah.
So you had 4 killed, 2 critically injured. You had a total, I want to say it was 17 shooters in the parking lot that engaged in the gunfight, with over 200 rounds in a Walmart parking lot that's not very big. So it was a lot going on.
Question.
Sure.
The professionalism to do exactly what you just said, is that you've got 17 people with high-powered rifles, guns, shooting, and no innocence.
None.
No innocence. That means that
There
law
were 6.
enforcement did not only its job, but it exceeded what it had to do. Is that what I'm hearing?
There were 6 total cars in the entire parking lot that were hit with gunfire. That's including ours and the suspect. So, yeah, the professionalism was there, 100%. No innocent bystanders were injured at all.
Mike, I can't say thank you in the right words. I know I speak for a grateful nation, a grateful community, your fellow sheriffs across the country. I want to thank you so very much for what you did, and appreciate you sharing this with us. And I know you carry those wounds for a long, long time. And if I were there, I'd give you an honor coin and tell you, God bless you and thank you. And on behalf of the memorial, the foundation, I see Marcia giving me the hook sign. I want to tell you what an honor it is to work with you, to be your executive director. I hope I meet your expectations every day. God bless you. Thank you. Let you wrap it up. If anything you want to say, and then I'll turn it over to Marcia.
No, I appreciate the time, and I appreciate everything the museum's done, and take good care of my truck.
God bless you. Marcia, back to you.
Jonathan, thank you. Thank you. And I've asked Thomas to keep Sheriff Neal up on the screen. But in the meanwhile, I first want to thank Josh and Drew and Philip for being with us tonight. When they were invited to join us, without hesitation, they agreed. And so thank you very much. And Jonathan, you never disappoint. Thank you for being there as a board member and as a friend, and as a good moderator for tonight's discussion. But Sheriff Neal, I especially wanted to talk personally to you and say to you that if I was there 10 years ago, it would have been you I would have been hoping was pulling up. So I extend to you gratitude for those who were there that 10 years ago today. I also think that it is so appropriate for this event to have happened the way that it did tonight, because it's because of people like you. It's because of law enforcement all around the country that allows Josh and Philip and Drew to be free and to be safe and to celebrate through great pork belly and chocolate and bourbon. And I think that these two things come together very appropriately. And I hope that you wake up every morning knowing that your efforts, what you do every day, keeps us safe and keeps us able to celebrate, but at the same time, recognize the sacrifices that are made by law enforcement all around the country. I honor you. I invite you to Washington as soon as this thing lifts. And I promise you to give you a personal tour of the memorial as well as the museum. And I know that there's 49 members of my staff that are eager to welcome you when you get there.
Yeah.
So put that on your agenda.
Absolutely. I love coming up there. I like DC, so.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I would also like to let everybody know that on June 3rd, we will be hosting our next event. It's the Definition of Insanity that will provide an opportunity to screen the film, A Definition of Insanity, followed by a panel discussion exploring Miami-Dade County's criminal mental health project. So again, thank you to Thomson Reuters for making tonight possible. Thank you all for joining us, and have a really great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.